Welcome to Healthy Chats. I am Amy Braun, CEO of HealthCorps, a national not-for-profit founded by Dr. and Lisa Oz. Since 2003, we have worked in high-need schools with a focus on ending health inequity by providing health and wellness resources to students, faculty, and families. Earlier this year, we created this podcast and video chat to discuss the numerous challenges and implications created by COVID-19 on the communities we serve. For the past several months, we have been bringing you conversations with innovators, leaders, and implementers in health and wellness with a common theme: thriving, not just surviving during this pandemic. Today, I am especially excited that we will be discussing what the world believes is a shot at hope: multiple vaccines that will hopefully not only save lives, but allow us to return to some form of normalcy. Because of the subject and the expert panel we were able to convene, we are doing things on a much larger scale today. Rather than simply recording our podcast, we are holding a virtual town hall, and our conversation has been determined by questions submitted by those of you attending. This conversation will still be produced and posted across our social media channels, so please feel free to share it with your friends and family and colleagues. I'd like to say a special welcome to our students and schools that have joined us and to the families from the National Parent Union. Based on your interest, our guests will discuss the FDA's approval process and the distribution process, how states plan on providing the vaccine, such as who receives it after essential workers, the vaccine's efficacy, and the challenges public health officials face to ensure the vaccine is equitably distributed, specifically historic and cultural mistrust within the Black and Brown communities. I'm very excited to say that today we have an incredible panel of experts joining us. So first up, I'd like to introduce Dr. John White. He is Chief Medical Officer of WebMD. Formerly, he was the Director of Professional Affairs and Stakeholder Engagement at the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. Welcome, Dr. White.
Thanks for having me.
Next up, we have Dr. Sharfstein, who's Vice Dean for Public Health Practice and Community Engagement at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Previously, he served as Secretary of the Maryland Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, as Principal Deputy Commissioner of the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, and as Commissioner of Health for Baltimore City. Welcome, Dr. Sharfstein.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Dr. Mina Merhom, board-certified psychiatrist at Columbia University, who specializes in the treatment of adults and adolescents. He completed his adult psychiatry training in the Mount Sinai Health System in New York City and his fellowship training at Columbia University Medical Center. Welcome, Dr. Merhom.
Thank you so much, Amy.
And last but certainly not least, we have Dr. Marjorie Bessel. She is the Chief Clinical Officer at Banner Health in Arizona. Dr. Bessel earned a BS in biology, magna cum laude from Syracuse University, and she attended Rush Medical College in Chicago, Illinois, where she was presented with the James B. Herrick Award for the most outstanding performance in internal medicine. Welcome, Dr. Bessel.
Thank you.
HealthCorps' founder and chairman, Dr. Oz, will join us towards the end of our conversation to share his insights. Well, there is lots to discuss, so let's get started. Having lived with this horrible pandemic since earlier this year, I think many of us have become citizen public health officials, consuming any and all information on the virus in an effort to stay healthy and keep our friends and family safe. News of the vaccine and its distribution truly is a shot at hope. I'd like all of our expert panelists to comment, but Dr. White, I'll go ahead and start with you. You've been following and studying COVID-19 since it emerged as a global pandemic. What have we learned about the virus, and how has that evolving knowledge informed testing and treatment?
You know, Amy, it's really humbled us. It's called a novel coronavirus because it's new. And we have to acknowledge there's a lot to learn. And we've been doing that in terms of how it's transmitted, how it may live on surfaces, and how it's passed from person to person, as well as how it may respond to different therapeutic agents. So we have learned a lot, and we have had to change some of our information for physicians and patients, as well as some of our strategies. And that's a good thing because we've responded to new information. But Amy, I also think in this, spirit of hope and hopefully a new day coming with the vaccine, think where we are today compared to where we were in February of this year. And if you think about it, we have at least 2 vaccines authorized by the FDA. We have multiple vaccine candidates that are coming on board. We have numerous therapeutic options, whereas we had nothing at first. And we have a multitude of diagnostic tests, both in the doctor's office and at home. So I think in some ways what we've learned is the power of innovation, the power of coming together as a country and the world to figure out how do we crush this pandemic. That's really what it's about. And I think we've learned how to work together, break down silos, understand how regulatory restrictions, we need to have regulatory flexibility. There's a couple silver linings in the COVID-19 pandemic.
Absolutely. I think we've definitely had some incredible breakthroughs in science. And I think that is a perfect segue to really start talking about the 2 vaccines that you have just mentioned that have been authorized. So Dr. Sharfstein, both Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine have been called mRNA vaccines. Now, with someone without a scientific background, I would love if you could just sort of explain a bit about how these vaccines work and why are they different than the flu shot?
Sure, and thanks for having me. I don't know for sure that the second one has been authorized quite yet. Maybe Dr. White knows. It's about to be authorized, should be any moment now. But these are 2 very interesting vaccines using a technology called mRNA, which basically takes the last stage of how a protein gets made in the cell. Usually it starts with the DNA, which has the code for the protein, moves to RNA. At the last stage, it gets moved to mRNA, which then teaches the cell how to make a particular protein. So this vaccine has the mRNA for a key protein in the coronavirus. It's actually, if you look at that picture of the coronavirus with the things sticking out, it's one of those things sticking out. That's the protein that it makes. And it basically goes right into our body, and our body gets the instruction to make that protein. We make that protein, and it teaches the immune system to be ready for a foreign virus like the coronavirus that actually has that protein on its surface. So and then that message goes away, that the mRNA just degrades. And what's left is an immune system that's ready in case it gets exposed to the virus. And when it does, we have antibodies, we have T cells, we have other things in our immune system that fight the virus. So it's like a message to our body that teaches the immune system to be ready for the virus.
Excellent. I think what you mentioned that's really important is to say that we're not doing anything with our RNA, right? We're doing it to the virus's RNA, which I think is an important distinction for everybody to understand.
It's a small bit of RNA that encodes for the protein of the virus, and it teaches our immune system to be ready for the actual virus without being the virus. So the vaccine itself does not have the live virus. It just has this little bit of RNA that encodes for a piece of the virus. And so by using that to teach our immune system, it's sort of like sending a message ahead that if you see something like this, get ready for it. Our immune system's ready. And then we fight off the infection when we actually get exposed to the real virus. And that's how they saw a 95% decrease in the number of people who got sick with COVID for people who were vaccinated.
Wow. And this, and Dr. White or Dr. Bessel, please jump in. This is different from the flu shot and from previous vaccines. How? Right? This is the first time we're using RNA. So what did our other vaccines or what did our flu vaccine use? Dr. White, do you want to answer?
Sure. The flu vaccine, and there are a couple of different type of flu vaccines. It's really kind of this weakened flu strand that is given to you and mounting a response. The challenge over the years in terms of the flu shot has been we often have to predict a year ahead of time which strand it's going to be. And sometimes they're pretty good at it. And some years, honestly, they're not. But the mRNA is going to be much more effective because it's going to give you that genetic code to make the spike protein, and then your antibodies will develop. So then, as Dr. Sharfstein said, when it comes around again, you've got the message, hey, you need to combat this. So very different technologies and very different mechanisms of action.
Yeah, and I would just add the difference also is we're starting to vaccinate now, and we had the opportunity here in our own health system to begin to do that this week, is around some of the logistics of this vaccine. So much different than a flu vaccine. These vaccines, they're very fragile and have to be handled very specifically. They're super cooled. Our freezer's at minus 80 degrees Celsius right now. They have a very short half-life, a shelf life, I'm sorry, once they've been reconstituted and are ready to be given to those that are willing to come get the vaccine. And in addition to that, unlike flu season, just this past season, we have a limited supply of vaccine. Influenza vaccine in general is always widely available each and every winter season. And right now we're starting off with a very limited supply. So the logistics of how we're going to give this vaccine, we're going through different tiers. It's going to our healthcare workers first, very different logistical plan of how we get the vaccine into individuals.
That makes a ton of sense. And you all have sort of mentioned that this is a new technology, right? And I know that it's been around in the news that it's super speed and it's incredible, and none of us expected it to go so quickly. So, I guess my question is it can be a bit scary if something's new or different, right? So what makes us confident about this type of vaccine? What makes us sure that this is, a safe procedure for us to go into?
Well, I think it's important to take into account a couple of things. This is a very difficult moment with the pandemic. More than 3,000 people are dying every day. And we're seeing hospitals flooded with patients in parts of the country, more patients than they can handle. So we're facing a ferocious virus that is incredibly dangerous. And we have now a tool to combat it. It's a tool that isn't as new as you might think, because it's based on many years of research and understanding, many years of patients being exposed for different kinds of conditions to mRNA vaccines. So it's not brand new. But it was made quickly. And the reason it was made quickly, the primary reason, was not because the studies that were done were smaller or fewer patients or less attention to detail along the way. The reason was we spent a lot of money making sure that we could do every step immediately after the previous step. So typically when people say it takes a bunch of years to get a vaccine, what happens is the company does the first stage and they see whether it works, and then they decide whether to invest in the second stage, and they see whether it works, and they decide whether to invest in the third stage, and if it works there, then they decide how big a vaccine plant to build to make the vaccine. So it just takes a while in between each step. But what the country did this time is we put so much money at the beginning. We said to the companies that the government will take, the taxpayer will take all the financial risk. So you do that first stage and just be ready to do the second stage. If the first stage doesn't work, we know that you've spent all this money on the second stage, but it's our money you've spent. And not only that, they started making the vaccine, not even knowing if it will work, just so that if it did work, we'd have it. Now, what would happen if that study didn't show that great benefit? Then they would have just thrown all the vaccine out, but they would have made it anyway. So we basically compressed the timeline by paying for each stage to happen right after the previous stage, kind of squeezed the different stages together, but each study was done in full. In fact, for those final studies, there were tens of thousands of patients getting the vaccine. Now, it's true that, because it's only been around for a certain period of time, that the patients got about 2 months after their vaccine to be monitored. We really only have the record of a couple months of safety data, for example. But that safety data is very reassuring based on what we have, didn't show any major concerns. And it's also the case that you would really expect to see major concerns in those first couple months. And so that's what's giving people confidence. But we're going to continue to monitor it. And so it will be continually monitored over time. There's going to be a lot of additional assessments of the effectiveness and safety of the vaccine. But to go back maybe just one last time to my first point, we're comparing the risks and benefits of the vaccine with the risks and benefits of getting COVID. COVID has long-term effects on people. Many people have had all kinds of debilitating problems. COVID is killing so many people. All of us, including young people, are at risk for a serious illness from COVID. So we're trying to weigh that risk against the potential of the vaccine, which has a very strong safety record in so far as it has been studied and is so highly effective. And that's why you're seeing healthcare workers across the country, including in at Banner Health, lining up for the vaccine because they know that the benefits of the vaccine have to be traded off against the risks of getting COVID. And for that reason, they're really excited to be vaccinated.
That's wonderful. And I think that that's a really, great point that you made about the way that they were developed, and, that they weren't developed, while they were developed quickly, they were still following the path that we have set forward for a lot of our other viruses, a lot of our other vaccines, and really took into account making sure that we set up the different stages and had the right number of people taking the virus along the way. I think that's a really crucial point for all of us to realize that while it was fast, it was, we really didn't change our system or change our standards at all. So I guess, Dr. White, I'm curious, what are some of the other vaccines that are out there that haven't been approved yet, that are still in process?
Yes. So Dr. Sharfstein talked about the messenger RNA viruses. Some folks may also have heard about what's called an adenovirus. This is one that AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson are working on. Johnson & Johnson is expected to submit their emergency use authorization request in February. And they're testing both a single dose regimen, which would be very interesting, as well as a 2-dose regimen, which the mRNA vaccines are. It works by a different mechanism, very similar in terms of getting your cells to recognize the spike protein and develop an immune response to that. There's also kind of the traditional inactivated vaccines that folks are thinking about in other vectors. I think the message for listeners are that there's multiple candidates in development. There's multiple drug strategies in development. And it's, as Dr. Sharfstein said, we really have to weigh the risks versus the benefits. The risk of getting COVID-19, either yourself or family members or people in your community, versus taking the vaccine. And I think we really have to help people think through in terms of ensuring confidence in the vaccine. And we can't dismiss people's concerns either. I want to acknowledge that. Sometimes in the medical profession, we can be disrespectful, we can be bad listeners, and we want to hear people's concerns, meet them halfway at times, and understand why they have their concerns. And just as Dr. Sharfstein explained, if you're concerned about the speed, this is why we're able to do it so quickly. If you're concerned about side effects, this is what we know right now. That's the way we're going to get people to consider vaccination. And as I said, the good news is there'll be these other candidates as well.
And to that,
sorry, Dr. Beerholm, please.
I just wanted to add as well, to your point there, Dr. White, one of the concerns that patients are often weighing here is the fear of what's already there, which is the fear of getting COVID, and this fear of the unknown, where anything could happen. Not really sure kind of what that is. And from an anxiety standpoint, when a patient is considering this decision and is coming from a point of just needing constant reassurance, as you mentioned, part of our role as the medical community is to be a bit patient sometimes with patients and to say, if you're looking for reassurance, there is plenty of reassuring data. As Dr. Sharfstein said, that there are really good studies, really encouraging information. So part of that patience for us, I think, is going to be critical as we encourage the community slowly to say the reservations are valid. Your fear is coming from an understandable place, especially given the historical situations in medicine that we've seen that contributed to this fear. And then to patiently walk a patient through that concern and to say, you know what, the concern that you have of the unknown and the fear of the unknown can be reassured and with all of these particular reassuring studies.
I think that's a great point. And one of the biggest fears actually is this next question I really wanted to ask. And Dr. Bessel, I'll start with you. The number one question we received from the individuals watching the panel that was submitted was, they wanted to know about the symptoms. And I know, Dr. Sharfstein, you mentioned that it was incredibly safe and that that we weren't seeing huge symptoms, but from what they've heard in the news, they said it's been reported that several people have had a severe allergic reaction. Should we be concerned about this? What are the side effects of the vaccine?
Yes. And so, as was already spoken about, the safety profile of this vaccine has already been studied quite extensively. Tens of thousands of individuals for the Pfizer vaccine were enrolled in the clinical trials, and they were followed. And what we also know about vaccines is that Most vaccine side effects occur within the first number of weeks after being vaccinated. And these individuals in the clinical trials have already been followed for 6 or more weeks. And so the safety profile that has emerged out of these clinical trials, honestly, is a safety profile that is very reassuring. The symptoms that have been reported by the subjects in the clinical trials are symptoms that are actually your body's appropriate normal reaction to a vaccine. When you get a fever that goes away in 24 hours, when you get muscle pains that go away in 24 hours, those are indications that your body's doing what it's supposed to. As we already just heard about, your body is reacting. It's starting to make those antibodies to get your body ready should it have to fight off COVID. Now, certainly allergic reactions are of a concern. And we know of a number of different individuals who, since we started vaccinating, have reported having these reactions. However, as we've just heard about, allergic reactions, they can be treated, they can be recognized, and individuals can absolutely recover from that. Whereas with COVID, as we just heard about, even young individuals, they may not survive it, or even if they do survive it, they could have very long-term effects from that. And so we're constantly balancing this risk versus benefit. As we continue to vaccinate, all individuals right now are being asked to contribute to the safety profile. There's an application called vSafe, where the CDC is starting to get additional safety activity. All of us who vaccinate are ready for an allergic reaction. So if you go to a site and if you were to have an allergic reaction, we will have trained individuals there immediately available to take care of you. And again, I want to assure the general public and all of those individuals who are getting ready to be vaccinated that we know how to handle allergic reaction. We believe by studying this, we'll probably be able to identify those who are more likely to have an allergic reaction and identify them ahead of time, have a risk-benefit conversation with them, and perhaps even put them in an even higher monitoring post-vaccination process to make sure that if they were to have this allergic reaction, we can take care of them. Again, the allergic reactions that we're hearing about are a very, very small percentage of individuals that are getting vaccinated. So we need to keep all of that in perspective.
Wonderful. Thank you. And you actually led me to a great segue. We have another guest with us today. And this was, again, in hearing from all of you, something that you really wanted was a firsthand account of an individual who had actually taken the vaccine and had been part of the trial. So with us today, I'd like to introduce a very special guest. Please welcome Victor Vandell of Austin, Texas. Mr. Vandell is a Navy veteran who participated in the Pfizer vaccine trials. As I mentioned earlier, as a number of you really wanted to know about these side effects. So we're very grateful to have Mr. Vandell with us today to share his experience. Welcome, Victor.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So Victor, taking the vaccine, was quite a big decision that you made. Was there a reason that you decided to participate in the trial?
Well, from a personal standpoint, so I have family and friends who have contracted COVID. I have family members that are high risk for COVID. And I even had a family friend pass away earlier this year due to COVID. So seeing this firsthand, it became a rather easy choice afterwards to participate in it.
Absolutely. And I mean, it was incredibly selfless and brave of you to do this. Did you have any side effects when you took the vaccine?
So when I did the double dose, on the first dose, I just had, some soreness in my arm for a day or two. But the second dose, I ended up having mild flu-like symptoms, mainly body aches and chills, but it went away after a day. So, and then after that, I've been fine ever since.
And I think this was very common, right? This is definitely what Dr. Bessel was just talking about, how it was your body kind of making the response to the vaccine. And so it was, I think you said it was within a day you took a Tylenol and you just felt better after those symptoms kind of started to start?
Yeah, pretty much that and a lot of bed rest, but I was good to go.
Wonderful. And Victor, I'm just curious, do you still wear a mask now that you've taken the vaccine?
I do still, regularly wear a mask. I still maintain the social distancing, as an extra precaution, but just you can never be too safe, right?
Absolutely. I think all the doctors on this would agree that wearing a mask after the vaccine is definitely still an important decision to make. Were your friends and family, was there any kind of response? Was anybody surprised that you chose to enter the trial? Were they kind of supportive about it?
Yeah. So my parents definitely were a little surprised about that, but for the most part, between friends and family, they was very supportive of my choice. And, of course, they had plenty of questions like, how's my health going? How am I feeling? Things like that. So, but overall, it's just been a very supportive kind of network on my end.
Wonderful. And how did you actually end up getting enrolled in the trial? How did you hear about it?
So I have a friend that also participated, and they referred me in. So.
Wonderful. So it was a pretty easy process. You felt safe and understood the whole way through.
Yeah, totally, 100%.
Wonderful. I'm sure I'm sure Pfizer would be happy to hear that. Is there anything that you would want to share with everyone out there who may be anxious about the vaccine, that you just want people to know about your process with taking it?
So mainly that I want to help build confidence out there in the community that this vaccine is safe and effective, especially for like the African American community, right? And being that living, breathing proof that this is safe, hopefully those on the fence will be more leaning towards getting the vaccine.
Thank you, Victor. I very much appreciate you coming on and sharing your story with us, and I'm very impressed by your decision to do that and step up and share that with your community. So thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I wanted to switch a little bit to the distribution side of the vaccine. And Dr. Bessel, you briefly touched on it, sharing that your hospital had started distributing the vaccine. And I'm sure there's many of us out there who have loved ones. My sister-in-law just texted a picture of her getting the vaccine. She's a first responder. I just wanted to check in and say, what's it been like for your hospital? Has it been smooth? Has there been challenges? What's that, across you have many different hospitals. So across your network, what has that kind of been looking like?
So, as I said before, it was an exciting day for us this week. We began actual vaccination. And as I like to say, every time I get to talk about vaccination, it really is the beginning of the end of the pandemic. This is how we get to the other side. It's such an incredible milestone for us. And yet, as I mentioned, there are a lot of challenges that we have. Currently, vaccine is in short supply, yet it's going to keep coming. We heard about the different types of vaccine that are coming our way. More Pfizer vaccine is coming next week. We're waiting momentarily to hear from the FDA to offer the emergency use authorization for Moderna and all others. But many of these vaccines, they have to be handled very carefully. Both Pfizer and Moderna have significant cooling requirements, more for Pfizer than Moderna. Because of that, you can only have them ready to go for a short period of time. So that creates some logistics. We have a lot of people that we need to vaccinate, and we do need to ultimately get over vaccine hesitancy. So we heard, from an incredibly articulate subject in a trial, how that went, and we will eventually get to a point where we need to get more people to want to get the vaccine. But right now we have a lot of pent up demand. I will tell you, it was an amazing day. I got to vaccinate our very first person. So she was an ICU nurse. She worked all night long. And she came. We actually are doing it at the state fairgrounds. So individuals are coming, they're staying in their car. It's a very quick process for us. They don't have to get out of their car. We're monitoring them afterwards in their car for allergic reaction that we spoke about before. And honestly, some of the others that came throughout the rest of the day, they literally were so emotional. Many of them were brought to tears. It's such a huge milestone for those that are our healthcare heroes on the front line. Being able to get something that's going to protect them and protect their families, it's truly changing. I do also want to just reiterate what we spoke about. Although vaccine is starting to flow, we are going into the darkest part of this pandemic right now, and we must remain vigilant about mitigation. We all have to do our part. Even those that are getting vaccinated, they must continue to mask. They have to continue to physically distance. This is a two-step process for Pfizer, so they do not have that 95% efficacy yet. until a week or so after their second dose. And in addition to that, we have all other respiratory viruses floating potentially around. So we have to remain very, very vigilant right now, even as we begin to vaccinate. But it was an amazing day yesterday, Amy. It was just the highlight of my entire professional career to be able to vaccinate our very first person here at Banner Health.
I see lots of smiles. That's just really such an incredible experience and opportunity that you got to have. And thank you and to you and your hospital for providing the vaccine to those that need it. I know we're all very appreciative of it. Dr. Sharfstein.
Build on what Dr. Bessel said.
Please.
First of all, that's really exciting, and congratulations to you and Banner Health and to New Mexico. One of the key questions that someone might have is, well, if you still have to wear a mask after getting vaccinated, how does the vaccine actually end the pandemic? And, the answer to that, I think the key is in what Dr. Bessel said, which is that if people keep wearing masks, if we keep doing all the things we should be doing with the vaccine, what we're going to see is slowly over time, the number of cases coming down, the number of people in the hospital coming down, and the amount of virus circulating in the community coming down. That's what we're really trying to keep an eye on. As long as there's a lot of virus out there, people should wear masks, they should be careful, just for fear that even if you don't get sick, you could pass it on to somebody else. But once we start to see everything coming down, then the ball game really changes. And that's why if we get vaccinated when we can, and if we continue to wear masks, keep distance, wash our hands, not go to big parties inside where everybody's not wearing a mask, we do those right things, we will see that we're turning the corner. We'll see the cases coming down, and when eventually it'll get low enough that with contact tracing and other things, we'll be able to really put the COVID crisis in the rearview mirror. And at that point, people won't have to be wearing masks and doing all those things the way we're doing now.
You both mentioned the double dose, right? That we have to. There's the first dose, and I think how many weeks later is it that we take the second? And I believe, is it different between Pfizer and Moderna?
Yes, it is. So for Pfizer, it's 21 days, and then for Moderna, it's 28 days.
And how are we currently as a society tracking that? Do we have a good system in place to make sure that everybody is able to get their second dose? Is the vaccine not really useful if it's only a single dose? Dr. White, do you want to talk about that?
What the preliminary data shows is there may be 50% efficacy after the first dose. And that's not really good enough. And that's why we have to ensure that people are going to come back. And that's where I think there's also going to be a challenge too. I think it'll be easier with health professionals. Often they're a captive audience as well, just as long-term care facilities are, because we don't want it to be, well, one's better than none. And if anything, the government is holding back that second dose, so not shipping it all out. And there's been some debate about whether that's the right strategy, but most experts agree, let's duplicate how we do in the general population as how they did in the study. And the study was focused on a 2-dose regimen. The one other thing I want to mention, because I think it's always important to be transparent in what we know, and Dr. Sharfstein parsed the data very carefully. It was a 95% reduction in the number of cases in Pfizer of symptomatic coronavirus. I think 162 in the group that got the placebo and 8 in the group that got the vaccine. The reason why we're still wearing the masks is we don't know if it prevents asymptomatic spread. Someone could still be infectious, but not symptomatic. And that's why we're going to continue to collect more information. But we really have to be transparent. And I'm interested in some of my colleagues on the panel. We also don't want to be overly ambitious in terms of how we talk about the vaccine. That's my own perspective. I think we have to inspire confidence. But I think as we start to roll this out more, we're going to have some hiccups. We're going to have some challenges in terms of administration. We've had a lot of problems with a testing strategy and PPE, and we're going to have to be patient. We're still going to see some adverse reactions that may or may not be related to the vaccine truthfully, but people are going to perceive it as such. So we want to always be transparent. We want to ask people for their patience. And even though we have a lot of encouraging data, there's still going to be some up and downs in the rollout. So I don't know if other colleagues feel like that as well. We want to promote confidence, but sometimes we're going to have to be measured as well.
You want to respond?
Does anyone agree with me? I don't know.
I was going to say, I agree very much. And I think part of the feedback that I've gotten sometimes from patients is in our attempt to sort of really underscore the hope of the vaccine, we sometimes can take it a bit too far. And sometimes patients can become a bit skeptical of that too. They can say, I mean, this is going to be the answer for everything. Now everything is fixed overnight. Say, well, no, as you're saying, Dr. White, we are measured in our expectation. There is great reason for hope. And we want to communicate that. And that's a realistic hope that we're seeing. This is not just a fantasy of hope. But at the same time, I think when we're explaining to patients that it's perfectly foreseeable and okay for there to be some hiccups and for there to be some need for patience on both sides along the way. And that's, again, that underscores the need for us to have these solid partnerships that are both with the government, with the community, with different organizations, to know that we're in this together. This is not going to be a silver bullet and everything goes away. Like Dr. Sharfstein is saying, there is going to be a process here in place that will take time. But when we're invested in that partnership together, we can certainly get there. And we want to keep in mind what it is that we're trying to get to, right? This life pre-COVID or post-COVID, when we can do all the things that we know we miss now, all the things that we all know together. So we can have that balanced perspective, certainly.
Yeah, and if I could just add one other perspective on that, I agree with all my colleagues' comments. We are still a very global entity. And so we're very, very interconnected. And we saw that with how the virus spread. And we have to be aware that we're talking right now about vaccinating our healthcare workers and our first responders. And then how do we get to other high-risk populations? But we're talking about the United States. And we are a very interconnected world. And the vaccination needs to also unfold in many other areas. We know that there's travel, there's connection. And so this is truly a global crisis. And the vaccination process has to also cover all of that territory. So we have many, many miles still to go. It's still very exciting that we have vaccine, but there's many, many individuals that need to get vaccinated in order to really eradicate and reduce the spread of where virus is so prevalent right now.
Yeah, I think it's important to emphasize that we're going to keep learning about the vaccine just like we've kept learning about COVID itself. Some of these questions we've already talked about. There's a great example about allergies. We know it's very rare, but possible that someone can have an allergic reaction and that there's treatment for that. But we may well learn more about exactly who's at highest risk for allergies. That's something we'll learn. This question of how much benefit from the first shot. I understand Pfizer is going to do a study to figure out how much benefit there is just from one shot. But right now, just like Dr. White said, we should follow what got us to the 95% effectiveness, which is the 2 shots. There could be very, very rare adverse effects that you don't see in a trial, even of tens of thousands of patients. So someone might listen to that and go, maybe I want to wait for more information about the allergies. Maybe I want to figure out whether I only need 1 shot. Maybe I want to see all those things. I'll wait another year. The challenge with that is that COVID's out there. So we're balancing that ability to learn more with the fact that we know that a very serious virus is there that could cause a problem and long-term effects that have all kinds of serious consequences for someone. So you're balancing the fact that we have a lot of data now to suggest a very effective vaccine with a strong safety profile. And while we will learn more about it, we know that the alternative is very serious. I had a call from a friend of mine who is in his 70s, has diabetes, is responsible for 2 young children, and said, I don't know, maybe I want to wait for the long-term effects. And I was like, a bad case of COVID, and you could be seriously injured or even killed. You're balancing that against, waiting to see what a tiny risk of something could be. Have to think about that. And I would, encourage him. And eventually he did decide to get vaccinated. He's getting vaccinated on Monday. So trying to think about, but keep 2 thoughts in our head. We're going to learn more, but that doesn't mean we can't make a decision now based on what we know and what the alternative is.
That's a great point. And it's, really sounds like you have to weigh what we kind of started this call talking about, right? That there's the risk of that's out there right now, and there's the risk of COVID and the long-term effects that we are still learning about, right? So we're still learning about the long-term effects of COVID. And if there was something, about the vaccine, that we're not 100% sure on, like you're mentioning, it's a weighted risk that we need to take. And Dr. Sharfstein, we talked about a little bit, it was briefed on in some of the people's responses, about the rollout of this vaccine. And I think, some people are going, well, when do I even get to take the vaccine, right? I mean, here we are talking about like, if, will you take it, but when do I get to take it? So, I know you've worked in an array of different public positions in city government and then with the FDA. So I'm curious, do you have any insight into what that's going to look like and how we're going to roll this out? How after the first responders, when people are going, well, when is it my turn? How long am I waiting? You're on mute, Dr. Sharfstein.
Thanks. It's going to vary a bit based on where people live. And it's also going to depend a lot on how much vaccine can be produced and how quickly. So we'll see how many doses can be shipped, and then the doses will go and be made available to states. Each state is setting up its plan for how different populations will be vaccinated. And so the first phase is healthcare workers and nursing home residents and employees. And then right after that, each state might do something a little bit differently based on its assessment of people who are at very high risk. It could be people who are particularly old with chronic illness. I think also in some of those groups will be people who are at high risk because of the kinds of jobs that they do outside of healthcare. So depending, each person's access then will depend a little bit on the state they're in and whether they meet these different criteria. But, by late spring, we're hoping there's going to be plenty of vaccine. So anyone who wants to get vaccinated can be vaccinated. So it may vary a little bit week to week who's available for vaccination in one state versus another, but in pretty short order. I think we hope there'll be a lot of vaccine available for most people in the United States, and every one of us will have the opportunity to be vaccinated.
And if I could just add, Dr. Sharfstein, regarding the prioritization of who gets the vaccine, one of the things that we've advocated for in the mental health community, there have been a couple of really great studies and articles published recently to say that it may not always be a population that we perceive as high risk for medical complications, that is the population with serious and persistent mental illness. But what we know from the data is that this population is actually at risk, a higher risk for contracting COVID, higher risk for more complications from COVID, and higher risk even for a decreased overall lifespan. So for those reasons, if you know someone who is in that category and you're a family member and you're able to advocate for that person and say, hey, it's not just if you have diabetes and if you're overweight and if you're in a long-term facility, have this on your radar and say, hey, this is an important thing to sort of prioritize for your own well-being if you're able to actually try to get the vaccine as well.
That's great. And I'm hoping that some states will partner with healthcare providers for people with serious mental illness or substance use disorders, because those healthcare providers may have good trusting relationships with them and actually use that path to vaccinate rather than say, you have to go across town and take 2 buses to get to the vaccine, which people may not want to do. They may be fearful or anxious about it versus going to their trusted healthcare provider in order to get vaccinated. So these questions of distribution are really important, and the ability of the state to find good pathways for distribution is really important for people to trust the vaccine and the process.
That makes a lot of sense. We're talking about the vaccine and then the new normal and the light of hope. And the question I would have is Dr. White, how many people need to take the vaccine for us to actually see, the effectiveness of it, for it to do what we want it to do on a broad scale, right? Not on an independent level.
And this is where we've talked about this 70 to 80% herd immunity. And if you think about a herd, a community, right, a group of people, a region, and here's COVID-19 trying to get into your herd, trying to poke holes and infect people. So if you have 70 to 80% people immunized or have developed antibodies because of infection, COVID-19 is going to come around and try to get in, right? And it's not going to be able to, right? Because it's going to come up against all these people that have immunized, and the virus is going to die. But if, say, I only have 50% in the community immunized, right? I'm then going to be able to come in a lot of places and be able to infect people that aren't immunized. That's the real challenge that we have to address with vaccine confidence. Because, as my colleagues have said, this is how we crush the virus. This is how we end the pandemic. But we can't do that with only 30 to 40% of the people joining in and getting immunized. That's where we really have to work together to help people understand the risk versus benefit and why it's right for them.
Makes a lot of sense. So I think you said it's 80%, right? So that's a big number for us to get to. And we've seen lots of organizations and lots of universities have released studies and they've polls about how many people are willing to take the vaccine. And granted, we obviously have to be careful with the data. So for the circumstance of this conversation, I'm going to use the Pew Research study, which says that 29% of individuals will definitely take the vaccine. So that's a far off number from the 80% we just talked about. So what are the type of public health efforts that we're going to have to utilize in 2021 to help individuals feel comfortable with this vaccine? Dr. Bessel, I'll start with you. What do you need to do at the hospital level to make sure that people are getting this information or getting, what they need to feel comfortable?
Yeah, and it's some of that we've already spoken about just a little bit. So we have to make sure that we have spokespeople out there that are talking about their vaccine journey. And we started very specifically here at Banner Health. We had a nurse, and individuals, they look to their colleagues. Nurses may look to a physician, nurses look to other nurses. Respiratory therapists may look to those individuals as well. And we need to have a very diverse and broad number of individuals talking about their experience. We need to build up the trust. And just to some of the points that we spoke about, the safety data and efficacy data is going to continue to build. So for some of those individuals who are being surveyed right this moment who say, I'm still waiting, well, that's not necessarily an uneducated perspective to have. I mean, Moderna hasn't even been given an emergency use authorization as of this moment. So we're going to continue to be able to build, but making sure that individuals from a broad, diversified background are talking about their vaccine journey will help tremendously. We know that individuals like to get their information from a trusted source. Just as we talked about, sometimes that can be their doctor, sometimes that can be their nurse, sometimes that can be their pharmacist. We need to make sure that all of those individuals are getting vaccinated and talking about their journey. That will help us get there. Right now at Banner Health, 83% of our staff who are in that highest tier of prioritization are indicating that they want to get the vaccine. So we're hopeful that as that continues to cascade, more and more individuals will start coming into that very positive perspective.
Wonderful. Dr. Meerholm, I'd like to turn to you. Over your career, you've worked very closely with minority populations developing mental health programs in churches across the United States and Canada. So in your opinion, how do we need to help instill confidence in the vaccine in some of these more community-directed ways?
I think one of the starting points goes to Dr. Bessel's point, which is a trusted source. Who is a trusted source? I had a friend of mine when we were in med school. We used to wear the shirt that said, trust me, I'm a doctor. Right? It was a little Dr. Pepper, cute, funny shirt. and much to our surprise, sometimes it's not just because we are doctors or healthcare professionals or whatever credentialing we may have that we automatically have the trust of the public. And as you mentioned, that statistic of 29%, that may be offensive almost to us. How could it be that we don't have the automatic trust of the public? And one of the ways that we can go about changing that, I think, is building this true equal partnership with the community. I learned this from a patient once who we were consulted on in the hospital, who had a very treatable yet very dangerous infection. But she said, I'm not taking this at all. And when psychiatry came to try to figure out, well, why is the patient not taking the medicine for the treatable infection? She said, Doc, I'm not taking this until my pastor can be on board and say it's okay. I said, well, how come? All your doctors, the chief of this and the head of that, folks who are experts in the field. And she said, Doc, no offense, you seem like a nice guy. You may know medicine, but you don't know me. And I said, that's fair. This patient is the expert in her own experience, and she has a trusted relationship. She explained to me that I know her, I've treated her for 5 days, but her pastor has been a part of her life for the past 15 years. He was at her wedding. He was at her husband's funeral. So we have to understand as healthcare professionals, and this is one of the key components for us, is that in this rollout, in this in it together kind of feeling, that we are a team, and a valued member of this team may not be the person we always think. To some individuals, it can be their community leader. To some, it can be a mentor. To some, it can be a teacher. Like you, Amy, you had a powerful influence on many people's lives when you were teaching. So those are things we have to be able to have the humility as the healthcare community to come in and say, we are not just partners with you, partners in which we can sometimes be a bit paternalistic if we're honest, and saying we have the information, we can tell you what to do. No, but we want to learn from you. We want to come alongside you and say, we can equip you with information. We want to understand your experience. And most of all, we want to begin to validate the fact that if you have a fear that is based on not just a distant experiment that was done, things like Tuskegee, but the continued inequities in medicine, that is valid, that is real, and we understand it, and we will not invalidate it by any means, but allow us to be a resource for you. Part of that involves actually being in the community as well, taking the time to be present and to listen, not always as experts, but sometimes as just friends.
Well, thank you for mentioning that. That is something that HealthCorps has also made a decision to do. Is in January, our coordinators on the ground will be working with their local community members and the schools that they serve to bring in local experts that the communities that we serve find trustworthy and valuable, and we'll be making sure that we bring them into the community to have real conversations like this, allowing them to speak to somebody that's a trusted source for them. So I think it's a great point, and it's something that we've definitely taken to heart as well, that we'll be working to do in January. Before we end, I wanted to just take a few questions from the audience that have come in. So one which I think is really important that we should talk about is, somebody brought up, well, we've gotten better at therapeutics and treatment options. So why should I take the vaccine if I can now go to the hospital and get healed? Does anyone want to jump in on that?
Sure, I can start for that. So that is absolutely accurate, that we have gotten better. As was spoken about by my colleagues here at the beginning, this still is a novel virus, and we're still learning about it. And we're also learning how to treat it. However, I would caution many things around that statement. While we are getting better, we are far from perfect. The death rate from individuals that are hospitalized is still quite high. 10, 15, 20%, depending on what part of the pandemic curve we are in. That's fairly significant. Hospitalization rate, depending on what age group you're in, it's still fairly high. And as we spoke about earlier, for those that don't get hospitalized, for those that don't suffer mortality from this, even if you're in a younger age group, you could still have long-lasting symptoms. And so, yes, we've gotten better. We have convalescent plasma, we have remdesivir, we have antibody treatments now that we can give to individuals who do not require hospitalization, but none of them are perfect. None of them should be considered a silver bullet. And so we should all be very cautious and take every caution that we can to not get infected in the first place. So I'm going to say, like I always say, wear your mask, be physically distanced, especially going into the holidays. Even though we are getting better and better at treating the virus, we still have a long ways to go, and mitigation and vaccination are really the better ways to go versus relying on getting a treatment that will definitely have a high likelihood of helping you, but may not do everything that you would hope that it would do.
And I want to add, some of those treatments are in short supply right now, and you shouldn't automatically assume that you'll get that treatment. We know there is disparate treatment around the United States. So I'd rather, focus on prevention rather than take a chance.
So that's a great point. Another question that's come up is about children and the vaccine. So I know there was a difference in age between, I think Pfizer was cleared for 16 plus, but Moderna has only been cleared for 18 plus. So is there a reason why that was the case? And then, following that up, when will children under 16 be allowed to take the vaccine?
Sure. The reason that there's a difference is that Pfizer studied its vaccine in 16 and 17-year-olds, and Moderna did not yet. But those studies will happen. Pfizer is continuing to study down to age 12. I think Moderna has now started a study down to age 12. So when we get those results, we'll see how those kids do. And based on that, there'll be a recommendation for children based on the data there. And, this is typical to look to make sure that vaccines work and have a good safety profile in adults when it's a disease that has the biggest effect in adults before you start studying in children. So it's not because of any concerns particularly about children, it's just that they started studying in adults because adults were more likely to get so sick.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. So one last, second to last question. We're obviously all taxed, and we've heard a lot about the coronavirus fatigue, pandemic fatigue, and you all put your head downs when I said that. So yes, I know you know what it is, and I know you've heard about it, and I know everybody in your profession is also fatigued. And Dr. Bessel, I can only imagine, how thankful we are for everybody in your hospital system who's working overtime to keep all of us safe. So the question I have for you is, are there any general practical tips that we can keep in mind to decrease some of our anxiety about the vaccine and COVID and really help try to keep our mental health up, as we do need to hunker down and keep practicing social distancing and isolation over the next few months until we get to that 80% herd immunity?
Okay, can I start with just one story? We have a podcast,
Yes.
Public Health on Call, and I interviewed the guy who set up the system for the NBA players, where they had to go into the bubble and live in the hotel and just play all their games for months. They did that. And some of the players were really going crazy. I think LeBron James put on his Instagram, like, I got to get out of here. I can't take it one more day or something like that. And I asked him, how did they make it through? They had no infections. How did everybody stick with the rules? And he said, because we knew it would end. We knew the championship game would be played, someone would get the trophy, and we'd all leave. And because we knew it would end, we could just pace ourselves, we could get there, And it's really a bit of a metaphor for the rest of us. We know this will end. With the vaccine, we know it will end. We just have to get there. We have to find that ability to say, we're going to be tough for a little while longer. We're going to get through this really difficult phase. Then we're going to get to a better place. We're not stuck where we are forever. And so I think about that. I think about, like, look, the day the championship game is going to come, there will be that day. We just have to stick to it until then.
Thank you. It's a great point. Dr. Merham, do you want to add anything?
I do, and I just, coincidentally, I actually consult as well for the National Basketball Players Association on their mental health initiative. And I've heard a lot of similar feedback that the bubble was a very difficult experience. And some players have even, it affected their play. There was Paul George who talked about that publicly. So when you can see even professional athletes who get to that point where it's still very stressful to be in the bubble environment and to be dealing with COVID, and as a Knicks fan, we're going to be dealing with no championships for a long time. So I just wanted to mention that for you, Dr. Sharpstein. And with that, one of the things we've discussed a bit with patients throughout kind of maybe the past couple of months, because I'm sure you might have heard a talk or two on how to cope with COVID, or there might have been a news segment or two that you've seen. One of the ways that we've condensed some of the evidence is a little bit of a mantra that I share with patients as a way to summarize the evidence in a way that you can remember, which is be more satisfied. So it's BE and then MS. So the B in the be more satisfied here is your brain. Focus on how you can have a more satisfied brain. Dr. Oz has been a leader in this field for a long time. If you just Google Dr. Oz brain diet, the superfoods that he shared with us, those are things that can go a long way. What you're eating, how you're sleeping, kind of your day-to-day routine. And if necessary, there could even be, now that we have more access to healthcare professionals, you can just Google a therapist and you can have one on your phone in 3 seconds. So that's something that we really want to take advantage of. The E in the be more satisfied is your environment. Who are you surrounding yourself with? We all have that, one friend that if you speak to, they can just give you more hope and they're more uplifting and they're more encouraging. And conversely, there might be the other. So where your environment is, where your social setting is, and as long as, again, if you're wearing a mask and social distancing, but there's still a lot that we can do to still be with loved ones and still be with folks in a very safe and careful manner. The MS, the more is, sorry, I blanked out for a second, is your mind. So there's a mantra that goes there as well, is that your thoughts determine your life. Essentially, our thoughts do determine our lives, and not every thought that we have is one that we have to go by. Not every thought that we come across is a valid one or a true one. So one thing that we know from a history of psychiatry and psychology is to challenge that thought into find the positive. You do find what you're looking for. If you're looking for hope in this pandemic, as Dr. Sharfstein said, you can look to the championship. You can look to the end. If you're looking for despair, that's not in short supply either. There's going to be somebody on your newsfeed who's going to tell you all hope is lost. Forget this vaccine. There's no chance. Or you can find actual hope and positive things there. And then lastly, the S, from a long amount of studies and evidence, is that spiritual, or the soul. So if you can satisfy your soul as well, that's regardless of if you have any kind of spiritual background. There's evidence for something called forgiveness therapy. In this pandemic time, if you're able to forgive someone, there was actually a randomized controlled trial that looked at this and saw the benefit of physical as well as mental health effects of something like that. Or being a part of a community that also can satisfy the soul in that way. But the big picture of it, to be more satisfied, is, and I've heard Dr. White speak about this as well, is how can we look here and look for gratitude, look for hope, and even find the collateral beauty in this experience that we're all looking for to possibly end in 2021, but that we've been through together, and really can be a source of potential hope that we can find.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. That's definitely something that we actually teach our students, and we've been working with them over the month of November and December, is gratitude, and that mindset of being grateful for what we have, and how we can give others, and how helping others and giving to others actually can help our own mental health. So I think a lot of what you mentioned was some great tips and tricks for us to help stay sane over the next few months. Stay sane and stay safe. So last but not least, I just want to kind of give you all a chance to answer one question that I know is on all of our minds in the same vein. When do you believe that life will return to normal?
So I'll start, Amy. So I think framing everything is really important as we even begin to talk about that. And I try to reframe those questions as to when will we get life back to more normal, to more pre-COVID. It's unclear that we will ever go back to things exactly they were before the pandemic. The pandemic will leave a lasting impression on all of us. But as we've spoken about, with vaccine coming out, with better treatments coming out, I think we can all look to mid-year in 2021 to be a turning point for us. We should have vaccine, as we've talked about, enough people getting immunized, have that herd immunity start to take effect, and that will help all of us get back to a more normal pre-COVID life experience.
Wonderful. Thank you. Anyone else want to jump in on the new normal?
I would just recommend, similar to what Dr. Bessel said here, in terms of reframing, perhaps there are some areas of the old normal that were not ideal. Maybe we can consider that there are some things that will be better, in that mid-spring time, that will be an opportunity for us to have a brand new normal. That's maybe in some ways we needed. We needed to have a different way to connect with our providers more quickly. We needed to have some things that we can use Zoom across the world now in a more efficient way. Whatever that thing is for you individually, but maybe not just looking to see how can I go back and do what I was doing last year, but how can I do something new and different for this coming year in this brand new, different normal.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. This has been such an informative conversation, and I just thank you all so much for joining us. When Dr. Oz discussed the town hall, he immediately remarked on all the caliber, and he was just so excited to join the conversation with all of us. So now I would like to just say we're so privileged to have our engaged chairman, who's also one of our country's most engaged medical professionals, join us. So welcome, HealthCorps founder, our chairman, and host of the Dr. Oz Show, Dr. Oz.
Yeah, well, this is the set. You're now backstage with me. Actually, that's the stage. There's clearing it. We just finished taping. So because of the snow yesterday, we had a little bit of a weird day. So I'm happy this all worked out. I want to give you 2 seconds of feedback on what HealthCorps is doing, and applaud Amy Braun and the rest of the team for really taking the organization to a whole new level. In 2003, when Lisa and I founded HealthCorps, it was really an effort to address health inequity through education. As a practicing heart surgeon in Spanish Harlem, this northern part of Manhattan, that's what I was facing. People just didn't know because no one had told them about some of the basic decisions for their general health. And you've been speaking about COVID, but one of the most important realities is the risk factors of general health abnormalities that lead to COVID complications. You've touched on them, but the data from New York is stunning. If you didn't, then the people who are admitted to the hospital, if you look at their data, 90% had 2 or more risk factors. They were obese and hypertensive and diabetic. I mean, it's a shocking reality. So since that time back in 2003, our in-school programs have impacted the lives of about 2 million kids. Their families obviously come along with them for the ride. They've become activists, changing how bodegas stack foods. And while the communities we serve face many challenges, COVID-19 smacked them super hard. Triple threat, impacting their health, their employment, their education. I'm so proud of how HealthCorps was able to pivot from the classroom to the living room, providing digital instruction, creating clubs for students as schools closed around the country. A lot of you may not know this, but a lot of kids get their food from their schools. So because so many communities where we work face food insecurity, HealthCorps coordinators were literally taking empty school buses to deliver not just educational materials, but food to the students. I mean, imagine this. This is in rural parts of the country, especially. They also helped organize massive food distribution programs to aid families of their students. We've been working on the food supply chain, which is a big part of the problem, that we literally don't have enough food for the food banks, or it's gotten too expensive for a lot of food banks. All of this we've been addressing with HealthCorps volunteers and some of the folks on this call. So as we begin to see the light at the end of the tunnel, and it is getting brighter, I'm especially proud of the HealthCorps' organizing of this town hall. I cannot thank Dr. John White, a friend of mine for too many decades. He never admitted publicly. Way back when he was really changing how we talk about health on television when he was at Discovery. He's a member of our HealthCorps Board of Advisors, all of whom I'm very proud of as well. Dr. Sharfstein, Dr. Miriam, Dr. Bessel, Dr. Vandal, Mr. Vandal, thank you for providing invaluable information and insight and giving it an hour of your life to help so many folks understand more about the opportunities and challenges that we're given with treating COVID-19. And again, Amy, the team, you guys have assembled an outstanding panel. And I really appreciate you having the foresight to make this conversation happen in a way that people, families, communities, all the folks on the webinar now can process. So with that stated, I know I get to come back and speak to some members of the group. So back to you, Amy.
Thanks so much, Dr. Oz. And I just want to reiterate, thank you, Dr. Sharfstein, Dr. White, Dr. Bessel, Dr. Mirham. It has been an incredible conversation. I learned a lot. I'm really hoping that our families have learned a lot and taken a lot of information away from this as well, and helps them make their decision about the vaccine and how they want to move forward. So deeply appreciate all of you for your time today. I know everyone in the medical profession right now is very busy. So we really, really appreciate you taking the time out of your day. Today's discussion will be produced into our Healthy Chats podcast and will be available on Monday, December 21st. You can find the podcast and today's video at healthcorps.org. I hope you'll subscribe to our podcast and listen to all of our episodes. Thank you all. And panelists, if you can just hold on for a minute while we end our live session.